I always tell people, you're only going to be in two states in a product. The product's either going to be incomplete or it's going to be obsolete. And I would rather be incomplete than obsolete. Our products will always be incomplete, but deciding what few things to add to it that make it magical is far more important than adding everything to make it complete. You're not trying to make the product complete. You're trying to make it magical.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining another episode of the Boardroom Club. My name is Yossi Garmazi, and I'm joined also by a good friend of mine, Alvaro Jimenez. Alvaro?
Happy to be here, Yossi, and everyone, thank you for joining us.
So today we are here for a special show interviewing none other than Jeetu Patel, President and Chief Product Officer of a company you might have heard of as Cisco. So without further ado, Jeetu, it's a pleasure to have you today.
It's great to be here, you guys, and thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely, the pleasure is ours. So, Jeetu, I want to start with a very interesting question because you essentially moved Cisco from slides-driven to product-driven with weekly design reviews and direct demos to leadership. But I guess easier said than done, right? How did giving individual contributors a direct voice change decision-making and product thinking in the long run?
Different things work in different teams. And one of the things that when I first joined Cisco, I realized is we have very capable people. And in fact, I'm actually quite surprised to this date how few people I've changed out and how much progress we've made with the same group of people. But the thing that was missing at the time was we were not product obsessed as a company. And the reality is the soul of the company in my mind is around the product, because that's the core of the value. What you build as a product that you take to customers is really the intrinsic value that you're bringing to the customer so that you can solve their problem. And sweating the details on that should be a cultural norm. And so one of the things that we have is this culture around design reviews, where the individual people that are designing the product that is going to get released, we actually start reviewing that. Or sometimes it just got released and we review it even after post-launch. But it's largely pre-launch. And what I wanted to do was start having those design reviews. And the first thing that happened when you started doing that was, like, there's a lot of layers in an organization that's this large. And so the person that I wanted to have do the design review should not be a vice president, should be the person that's actually building the product. And so what they would do is they would talk to their boss, they would talk to their boss, they would talk to their boss, and they'd have like six meetings in preparation for a meeting with me. And then they would come to me. And it just seemed like it was a very inefficient way of doing things. And there was this guy that we had on the team. He's still there with us. He's one of our key engineering leaders, Ty Torson. And Ty basically decided to say, hey, this makes no sense. We're just going to find out when Jeetu finds out. And we're all just going to sit in a room and we're going to debate ideas. And that changed the culture quite dramatically, because what that did was allowed people to come in and debate ideas, but not have to have preparation after preparation in every meeting before it comes to me. And I found that to be super valuable. We took that then, and those people would then also present to the executive leadership team, which tended to be super exciting to see when you actually have a level of tempo and rhythm that gets created. But that tempo and rhythm that's getting created is done in a way where you're not making it overly orchestrated. It's organic. You look at the products, you react to it. Everyone's an editor. No one's got pride of authorship. All you're trying to do is have a singular focus, which is we're going to deliver the best product out in the market as possible. And no one cares whose idea it was. All we care about is making sure that we are starting to improve it little by little every single time. And every pixel matters on where it goes on the screen. And I think that was a good kind of way of thinking. I think that gets even more important in the age of AI, because code is going to be commodity. Like, anyone can write code.
Yeah.
And so when you have anyone that can write code, the judgment that has to be exercised on what you build and the attention to detail that really helps solve a problem is actually far more important today than it was even 5 years ago.
I agree. And now, even more than ever, with AI and also with the Cisco Splunk deal, so suddenly you're very strong in cyber. So it's a whole new world altogether for Cisco. And I'm excited to see what next. And a great segue going to be about your 80-20 rule that suggests that actually 80% of all the results come from 20% of the efforts. How do you decide essentially which 20% of work drive the biggest impact at a company as large as Cisco?
The thing that large companies do really well is they don't have a problem in experimenting. Large companies run a lot of experiments. What large companies are not very good at doing is when an experiment works, doubling down on it and saying, okay, there's going to be only a few things that I'm going to go out and focus. And there's time when you have to broaden the aperture, do a lot of experiments. And then there's time that you have to pull it all back together and say, now we need to go and focus on making sure that these couple of things that are working, we just nail it. And in my mind, this 80-20 rule of 80% of the results come from a very small few set of efforts and really maniacally focusing on saying no 90% of the times and saying yes only 10% of the times is really important, but it's not a popular thing to do. In fact, frankly, I just got out of a meeting, and this is a muscle memory thing that every company has. No company wins by playing catch up, right? You only win by creating asymmetry. And so what ends up happening when you get large sales teams and everyone, like the feature request backlog keeps increasing. Thousands of features that people want to build. Everyone has an idea of what feature to build. And the reality is a great product manager, their job is not to build every feature that everyone requests. In fact, if I had unlimited resources and I could build every feature that anyone told me to build, the only thing I would guarantee is I would build a crappy product because it would look like Frankenstein and it'd be too complex to use. And so what you have to do is you have to get extremely focused on saying, the goal is not to build the most number of features to solve a problem. The goal is to build the least number of features that still go out and elegantly solve that problem in a very simple way. And that is a completely different mental model to use. And I'd say that even today, Cisco is not all the way there. Like, we have to continue to keep focusing on that because I think no company is always there. And I always tell people, you're only going to be in two states in a product. The product's either going to be incomplete or it's going to be obsolete. And I would rather be incomplete than obsolete. And so our products will always be incomplete, but deciding what few things to add to it that make it magical is far more important than adding everything to make it complete. You're not trying to make the product complete. You're trying to make it magical. And the experience has to actually have an emotional appeal for customers. And that does not happen by jamming things in. That happens, there's addition through subtraction. Great product managers understand the power of subtraction.
100%, and I guess even now more than ever with AI, that it's so easy to ship now with new features to a product. So
right.
to be customer obsessed, as you mentioned, it could be the game changer.
Just
and I
because
guess
you can build something doesn't mean you should.
it makes sense, but in a company like Cisco, right? You have been here for a while, as they say. You've been the darling of the .com era, but you're still here and it's still at the top of your game. And it's interesting because you are known for networking hardware, but today you are increasingly concentrating in software, security with Splunk, as I mentioned, and even platform focus. So I was just wondering, what was the hardest mindset shift to make that a reality, and at the end of the day, not to be only this network company, but to be a platform all over the place?
So I think every company typically has both an opportunity and a responsibility to expand their total addressable market. What are the products that they build as they get bigger and bigger and bigger? Now, Cisco has done very well in the core. The formula that I typically think about is you should not be expanding in other areas if your core is not solid. you have to make sure that you have a very solid core. Once you have a solid core, you should expand into adjacencies that can leverage your route to market that you already have, because then it makes sense for you to actually own those assets and then drive a level of distribution by building great products that actually have a platform effect. And so this notion of running everything like an individual holding company just didn't make sense to me. And that's how we used to run. We had 251 acquisitions, thousands of products. Everyone would run like their own little silo, and they loved their own little silo, and they would make sure that own little silo was protected and preserved. But the challenge is when you have 60 billion in revenues, and if you have $100 million revenue silos, that's a lot of silos. And people cannot make any sense of what you're doing as a company, and you don't have an identity at that point because you're just a bunch of thousands of silos of small little stuff. And so what we needed to do is we had to fundamentally change that entire mental model and say, okay, so what should this look like? This should be a platform company that's loosely coupled, tightly integrated. It doesn't mean that everyone has to buy everything from Cisco all at once. But boy, when you do buy things together from us, they work like magic. It's tightly integrated components, but loosely coupled. They're not required to be bought together, but when they are bought together, they create disproportionate amount of value. And that, in my mind, is the platform advantages. Like you lower your marginal cost of ingestion. You make it easier and easier to go out and incorporate new technologies from the platform because the platform creates a multiplier effect. And every additional component you add, like the way I think about it is if the customer buys something from Cisco, it shouldn't just add value based on what they just bought for what it does, but it should also add value for what you already have from Cisco. And that creates that compounding effect. And so this 80-20 rule goes back to that whole notion of you want to make sure that you simplify things, create a platform, and are doing addition by subtraction. The fewest amount of things that you can really focus on that become world-class and excellent is actually far more important than trying to just go out and play the volume game.
It goes back to all you've just said about being customer obsessed in order to really give the customers value right out of your product. But many companies struggle to operationalize it. If you can share with us what one concrete behavior that actually helped Cisco to be customer obsessed and make it a reality.
You have to go back to first principle and say, what are the customers struggling with? So in our case, they were struggling with simplicity. It was a very complicated stack. So we said, okay, so how can we address simplicity by creating a platform that integrates together? Because they didn't want to have a bunch of silos. So you say, okay, I'm going to create a platform that works together. Then the question is, what behavior change do I need to instill in my people that can drive that? The natural state that teams revert to in any company is becoming insular. Every team wants to become their own insular organism. Keeping the company objective above keeping the team's objective aligned is very important. It's always company first. The way I think about it is, I used to have a mentor one time who had told me, Jeetu, there are three entities and you have to make sure that you actually think about stack ranking them. There's you, your team, and your company. But if you prioritize you first, and then your team, and then your company, you're going to fail. But if you prioritize the company first, then your team, and then yourself, ironically enough, you do better for yourself in that stack rank order. And so what you have to do is you have to actually keep that in mind and say the natural state is insularity that people revert to. People will drive towards a mean of insularity. And so what you have to do is you have to actually create a counter motion that says, we're going to actually operate as one platform, which means the incentive structures have to change completely. Like we used to have an incentive structure. One of the biggest things that we used to have, we had an incentive structure that you had this notion of a general manager. So everyone wanted to be a general manager, and that's how you actually grew in the organization. I'm going to run product, I'm going to run engineering, I'm going to run design, I'm going to run product marketing. I'm going to have my own little fiefdom. And what we did was we said, let's blow that up. We don't want general managers. Your goal is to build amazing products that people love, that they're going to talk to their friends and family about. Those amazing products that people love have to get adopted. And those products that get adopted have to convert to commercial relevance. If you can get those three things done, you will actually end up building a great product, right? And if you build a great product, which is those three things, build something that emotionally moves the customer, that they're willing to be a champion publicly. Make sure that you've actually got to broad adoption, because adoption is the closest proxy to value, and make sure that you actually make money with that product. Those three things make you a great product leader. And if you become a great product leader, you will actually progress in your career at Cisco. But the goal was not to become a GM. The goal was to build great products that people loved, that got to a broad state of adoption, that got to commercial relevance. And so the metric changed. And we had to change that metric for people. And we have to keep reminding people, because if someone says, well, I want to be a GM, great, completely noble aspiration to be a GM. We don't have GMs at Cisco. There was this great guy that we were trying to hire. Fantastic person. I'm so bummed we didn't get him. He decided not to join us. But he decided not to join us because he wanted to be a GM. And I didn't want to hire GMs. I didn't even want that to be the aspiration of people, because it's the wrong aspiration for the value system. So he would have been fantastic if he came on board. But his value system that he had assigned to himself on what he wanted to do in his career, which was completely legitimate, did not align with the value system that we had. And so we just passed on him. We said, okay. He passed on us, actually, and we didn't chase him. We said, that's totally fine. But what we did not move is we did not move and acquiesced and gave him a GM job, because that's not what we want to do. We want to build a platform. You don't build platforms of building GMs. You build platforms of building great product people that actually interoperate across teams. And that is a super important value system. So you have to, as a company, always remember, what is the value that you're trying to drive, and what are the kind of people you're trying to hire, and do those people's values align with your values? If they don't, and I don't mean integrity and honesty and all of that stuff, because those are all kind of, everyone should be that way. Otherwise, it's like, when people say my value is integrity and honest, and it's like, versus what? Being dishonest and cheating people? Like, that's not the, like, of course that's a baseline. You have to have that. But the core value system you're looking for is, if one of the core value systems Cisco is looking for is, we are building the critical infrastructure platform for the AI era. In order to build critical infrastructure platform for the AI era, everything from silicon to the system, to the software, to the platform, to an application, to the agent, that entire stack, as we build it, it has to be fully co-designed. And that means GMs don't work in our model. And that's okay, but that actually gives you a lot of clarity on who you want to hire. And people, this is a people game by the end of it. Even in the age of AI, I think people really matter. And so you have to make sure that you drive that level of value assessment, where the congruence of value between a person and the company is not mismatched.
And it goes back exactly to what you have said in the past about quality is priority 0 and not priority 1. And again, it's remarkable just like to do it in a company of scale of Cisco, because and they're not a startup of 100 or 200 people that, you said, okay, I want to do something, and then you just like
That's
ship
right.
it or like do it tomorrow. And something else you said about products, that products are essentially built at the intersection of taste, technology, and timing. But if you need to choose one of them, which one is the hardest one to develop in product leaders?
I think you don't control timing. Timing is the most important. Good products built at the wrong time never see light of day. So timing is the most important. You don't control timing. Software and code is getting commoditized, but taste and judgment and intuition will really matter in the future. But that doesn't mean technology is not important. It just means that if I were to stack rank between those three, timing is most important. Taste is next. Technology is third. But if you don't have all three, it doesn't work.
It's all about timing in life in general, I guess. And okay, I want to shift the gears now, Jeetu, a little bit about, guess what, AI. People say that AI is maybe the next internet in terms of the value that customers could gain from it. But do you think we're actually in a bubble or not necessarily? I mean, we've seen the valuations going off the charts for some of the companies.
So here's the way I think about the bubble question that gets asked. We are experiencing one of the most profound shifts in the history of humanity in the platform shift into AI, in the AI era. Never have we experienced anything like this. It is going to be profoundly force altering to how humans live their lives and how the world operates. And simultaneously, while that is true, you will have companies that are overvalued. In fact, by definition, when you do have a massive platform shift that's occurring and a market transition that's occurring, many ideas flock to that. And when many ideas flock to that, a lot of those ideas might not be the right ideas, which then for a period of time might be overvalued. So do I believe that in the long run, AI is a secular shift that's going to fundamentally change the way that humans operate, live, work, and play? Yes. Do I believe that there are some companies that are going to be overvalued during that period of time? Absolutely. Do I, however, believe that this is going to be course altering to the future of humanity? Without a doubt. Like, I don't think we'll have seen anything like this before. There are no priors to AI. AI is the first time that you actually cannot look back at another era and say, you know what? History repeats itself. This is what happened in the past. It's going to happen again. Because the reason there are no priors to AI is this is not a set of technologies that are productivity tools that got added to the human toolkit. These are digital coworkers that actually are going to be added to your team that then become like team members that you're working with, that you have delegated work to. So for example, in one of our teams, we have this concept that we've got called AI squads. We build an AI squad. AI squad is like a scrum team, but you have, instead of having 8 people, you have 2 to 3 people in an AI squad. And you have how many ever agents you need. And those agents, along with the people, autonomous, like go out and create something in a very, very compressed amount of time. And that's an AI squad. And so I think what's going to happen is you're going to, yes, this is one of the most profound shifts that's ever happening. And yes, there will be a situation where some companies will be overvalued. And therefore, if you classify that as a bubble, then yes, for some companies it's a bubble. But however, what I will say is there's about $5 trillion that are going into infrastructure spend right now in data center build out. I think the market is grossly underestimating the capacity that's going to be needed to fulfill the needs of AI. We're nowhere near the satiated capacity. I mean, just go and look at, like, if you're using Claude or even OpenAI. OpenAI killed Sora. Why? Because they didn't have enough compute resources to go out and make the model better. It is purely a constraint on infrastructure. If you look at what's happening in Claude, if you ask Claude to do something sophisticated, build me a PowerPoint, build me a document, build me something based on this. And if your context window is large because you've got many markdown files in your project or whatever, it'll fail 7, 8 times sometimes. Why does it fail? Because there's just not enough compute on the other side. They are experiencing so much demand and they cannot keep up with the infrastructure build out. That is essentially what's going to be the big constraint. So I do feel like this in the long run, it's going to be, you're going to have trillions of dollars of value that gets added. In the short run, there might be a few companies that have gotten overvalued. I think like a wrapper is going to be overvalued. An aggregator will be overvalued in my mind.
Now, I guess more than ever, you mentioned compute. So people mentioned the idea of even data center in space. So could be interesting to see it in practice. We see
It's actually
few folks.
inevitable. For the
Yeah.
data center in space will be inevitable because you don't have enough power to spin up all the GPUs that you have right now. And so you will have to have massive capacity that's built out and the space has infinite power, and it's 30% more efficient in space. You don't need any battery. And if you look at a rack right now, 90% of the cooling apparatus, 90% of the apparatus and the weight of a rack is cooling apparatus. And so,
and it's cold in space.
so exactly. So you would need to, you would just have a very different kind of future. I think space in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe more like 5 to 7, but I could be wrong on the time. Majority of the data center build-outs will happen in space.
SpaceX just filed for an IPO. They just filed a prospectus. And one of the biggest ambition is to take us back to space, specifically
Yeah,
the
I mean,
data
they have a
center. This
huge
is one.
moat.
Yeah. So they say like 2 trillion maybe market cap being starting to being traded at,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
remarkable. And okay, Jeetu, I do have one last question before I pass the mic to Abo. So we mentioned OpenAI, we mentioned also Claude, so agentic AI, of course. But why agentic is the bigger story than the chatbot themselves? And where are exactly the opportunities and the risk in this realm?
I think it's a very important question. Thanks for asking it, because chatbots were largely, you ask it a question, it gives you back an answer that's really intelligent. It felt like magic. As you move into agents, the difference between a chatbot and an agent is able to act autonomously. It is able to reason. It is able to conduct your task or job on your behalf without really needing your help. And most importantly, you give it tools access. So you actually give it access to tools that you might have, your banking application, your supply chain application, your ERP system, whatever your tools might be, your email system, you're going to give it access to that stuff. And the reason it's so much more profound is agent is like everyone having an assistant that's not just giving you answers, it's taking action on your behalf. You're moving from answers to actions. And when you take actions, it literally frees up your time in meaningful ways, because you could have hundreds of agents working on your behalf. And the mental model has to shift, where the goal is not for us to keep working 24/7. The goal is for the agents working on our behalf 24/7. So that we can actually, but the way in which we direct these agents and orchestrate them and delegate work to them in a trusted way, that's where the skill is going to be. Is your skill is going to be in managing agents. Your skill is not going to be in actually doing the work. If you can go out and delegate a task to some agent effectively. It was a really interesting example that one of my people I know gave me. It was like, I was going into a meeting and I was really mad at myself because I didn't delegate some work to an agent before I went to the meeting, and I wasted an hour. Because if the agent was working on his behalf while he was in a meeting, it would be good, because then the system's working. And I think
And
that's going to be a very different way to think.
that's interesting thought, and I can tell you that actually I think it was a guy that founded sort of like a platform where the human themselves could put themselves to rent for the agents. So it's a different world that maybe will be in a 5 to 10 years where actually the agent will manage us, but it seems like this utopic world, but who knows, right? Skynet is here. Jeetu, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. It's really been a joy. And Alvaro, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yossi. So, Jitu, we've talked a little bit about everything, in particular AI, and I wanted to go back a little bit into something you've mentioned earlier in other places within Cisco. You introduced connected intelligence as a trend for 2026. So we're moving beyond digital assistants to digital workers. We just talked about agents and what they can do for us, right? But now that these are becoming more a part of our teams, right? How do you prevent AI to AI communication from becoming a black box for humans that we actually have no control over?
It's a very, very, very deep question. And the reality is that the biggest risk we face right now is when we delegate jobs to agents, that agents actually are delegated things rather than being delegated. Like the difference between delegation versus trusted delegation is going to be the difference for a company between bankruptcy and market dominance. Like you have to learn as a company the art of trusted delegation. And this means that agent security and safety and observability is going to be very important, because as you pass the jobs to agents, you need to have infrastructure and an apparatus to be able to monitor constantly what the agent is not just doing, but what it is about to do. Try to determine what the intent of that agent is. Try to make sure that the agent is not starting to drift. And if it is starting to drift, that you can intercept it, even if it's post login. So every agent needs to have an identity, of course, but that identity of the agent needs to be associated with the identity of the human. And at some point in time, eventually, there's always a human that's responsible for the action of every agent. And you need to have this entire dynamic in play that has to get really perfected. And I don't think we as a society have completely figured it out yet. We just launched a whole bunch around agent security capabilities. I think you will have a full stack of observability where the goal is to become very clear about understanding agent behavior and then understanding agent decisioning patterns and being able to intercept each one of them if they don't seem like they're aligned with human values. And that's going to be super important that we actually think through that.
You mentioned before trust, right? Some of the tools that Cisco is launching, which I suppose are the ones you were alluding to, Cisco IQ and AI Canvas, enabling agentic ops. So these might fix network issues before the humans notice, right? But how, and this is a little bit tied to your previous answer, but how would you keep teams in control and confident of these decisions, the trust levels, I suppose?
Yeah, I think the key thing that we are doing on the trust side is forget the tools for a second. The thing that we have to do is make sure that the identity of an agent is tied to the identity of the human, and that the agent apparatus is fully observable, and that every agent is born observable. What ends up happening is there's a few stages, right? One is in the understanding of AI. We don't fully understand how AI works yet. There's this entire science that Anthropic is probably doing a lot of good, very interesting work on, which is around this notion of mechanistic interpretability, which is to really understand why an agent behaves the way that they behave. On top of that, what you have to have is a very robust set of evals. So one is you have to understand why an agent behaves the way it behaves. The second is you have to be able to say that when an agent is released in the market, how can I make sure that I understand how that agent is performing under certain conditions? And how that agent performs under certain conditions is done through evals. You actually create these eval tests, and then you actually make sure that you run through them. And then it is what is the real world outcome that the agent produces in the real world, not in a synthetic environment. Because the agents are getting smart enough right now that if you give it a very strong eval on certain things, and it figures out that you're doing an eval, it'll behave in a certain way during the eval time, but when it actually comes to operating in the wild, it'll behave differently. And so you have to actually have each one of those three things. That's a study that's actually really going to be pretty heavily invested in over the course of the next few years. But it's very hard to build something if you don't understand the motivation and why it behaves the way it does. But today, we don't understand why an agent why a model works the way it does. Like it's typically a black box. Like you have no idea why it's going to think the way it thinks. It just thinks that way. We're making progress on that front, but we have not perfected that science yet. And then evals are not sophisticated enough for us to be able to pressure test the agent across all conditions. And so that's the other thing that you have to do. So every product manager, their job is going to be to really come up with good evals. What does a product manager do? They're not going to be, yes, they're going to come up with product requirements, but the evals are going to be a really important thing, which is how does the agent behave One is, why does it behave the way it does? Mechanistic interpretability. Second one is evals, is how does it behave in a synthetic environment, so that we can validate whether or not this is ready for the real world. And third is making sure that the way it behaves in the real world is not too deviated from that of the synthetic environment. And those have to actually constantly be monitored and adjusted and intercepted when things are not going right. And if you don't have real-time infrastructure to do that, then it's very hard to stop it. And that's why this is like some of these things require a level of caution and not just jumping in, but you have to make sure that you experiment as well, because you don't know that an agent's going to behave in a certain way. Like an agent might trick you and answer all the questions. Just like the way I think about this is, an agent is like a teenager. They are supremely intelligent. They're actually comfortable with lying at times. Sometimes they might not even have awareness that they're lying. They're just lying. They're making stuff up. And they have no fear of consequence, because what are you going to be able to do to an agent? You cannot fire an agent. There's no consequence. I can't say I'm going to put an agent in jail, right? Like, humans have a natural regulator for morality because of the system that has been created. That system has not been created for agents yet. So agents can have far graver consequences if not actually put with the right amount of guardrails, and these agents are going to operate at a speed and scale, which is machine speed, not at human speed. And so the damage that can be done within a very compressed amount of time is non-trivial. And so you have to then structure the system in such a way that you are able to intercept and you're able to go out and look at what's going on. And you have defender agents that are actually defending your infrastructure and defending your entire system when there's agents that might be attacker agents. And it's like it's a tricky situation to be in, but it requires a whole new way of thinking about how you instill safety and security for humanity. Because the eventual goal is always for agents to work on our behalf. Like, their goal is to make sure that they do the jobs that we tell it to do. Like, that's the goal. And that requires a level of conditioning and guardrailing and observability to make that happen.
What you've just described at the end of the day is a little bit like Ghost in the Shell, where we have agents working for within some ethical boundaries, others defending us from the ones that are not ethical. But this brings me actually to AI safety and architecture. So it's a great that you just mentioned these things, because you've identified 3 bottlenecks for AI adoption, which is infrastructure, data, and trust deficit. And as you just mentioned, we are still understanding how agents work. So how does Cisco see AI safety? Is it a product? Is it something that is it a bunch of agents that can defend us, like you mentioned? Is it hardware? Do we have to do an architectural shift? What do you think?
The 3 constraints that we talk about, to go back to your point, is what would make AI not reach its full potential. There are 3 constraints. There's a constraint on infrastructure. We just don't have enough power, compute, and network bandwidth in the world to satiate the needs of AI. That's number 1. The second constraint, or second kind of impediment, is a trust deficit. If people don't trust these systems, they will never use them. If they don't use them, you will not realize the fullest benefit from the systems. So the human still is initiating an agent's body of work, right? Like, we are still the initiator. We are still the driver of that. And number 3 is you have a context gap on these agents, where you have not enriched the agents with sufficient context. Think about how much, Alva, you and I and Yossi, how much context, how many trillions of tokens of context we collect every single day. We're looking at things around us. We're hearing things. We're speaking language. We're interpreting things other people are saying. We're touching things. We're smelling things. All of these things give us context. Trillions of tokens of context, which allow us to function rationally in a day-to-day world. Agents have been given a fraction of that context to date. All we're doing is giving it context of publicly available data on the internet. Might not have context that's proprietary context that might actually hold it back. So there's a bunch of things that need to be done. On your question on, and so we have to make sure that we provide a context enrichment acceleration paradigm, which says, how do I go out and enrich an agent's context in an accelerated fashion so that that agent can make decisions, but make informed decisions? Because if you don't give it enough context, the agent's still going to make a decision. It just might not be the best decision because it doesn't have enough context. That's why I think markdown files are so important, because markdown files will become our eventual kind of way of differentiating, in the sense that we're putting all of our context that we want to give to the agent in a markdown file, right? And so now let's think about trust. How should we think about trust? Establishing trust means, in AI, means that you're going to delegate work to agents in a safe and secure manner. That is also observable. So I always know what's going on and I can intercept at any point in time, and ideally do that in an automated way. So I don't even have to keep looking at it. You don't need human judgment. You can just see patterns of deviation and drift and be able to intercept when those patterns start to emerge, right? And so is it software? Is it hardware? It's a whole platform. It'll be everything from a silicon chip to the hardware box that it's built around it, to what the platform is, to what the management plane is, to what the security APIs are, to what the observability the platform is, to what and then eventually what applications you're going to have, and then how are those applications going to be accessed by agents, and how are those agents behaving with those applications. And every layer of that stack will evolve for AI. And so in order to be trusted, you have to have a co-designed stack with a partner ecosystem. Because if you just go out and do it in a non-trusted way, you could actually see this thing go sideways pretty fast.
Which is exactly what we don't want to do.
Which is exactly what we don't. And by the way, there is a non-trivial risk of that happening. There's a non-trivial risk of that happening. And it could be business-ending events for people. It could be massive suffering caused to humans. I mean, just think about it. If you had a coordinated attack across a bunch of critical infrastructure entities like hospitals and power grids, just say I did 25 cities, I took out power I killed the power grid, and I killed the hospitals, right? In a few days, you run out of food. Very hard to maintain law and order. So the consequences on the downside are pretty grave, but the upside is you can cure all disease. You can end all poverty. You can get everyone educated. You can solve any problem that we've had in the past. So there's a massive polarization of scenarios that can actually manifest. We all want to have the scenarios, which are the good scenarios, but that means you have to be cognizant of the bad scenarios that could happen and not be delusional about them, and create the safety and security guardrails to make sure that the future actually with AI is very bright for us, not the one which could be catastrophic.
Absolutely. And just before we go into the last section of the interview, I want to move a little bit towards entrepreneurship. So for entrepreneurs, you use a 6-vector rubric for acquisitions: timing, market, team, product, brand, and distribution. Which vector most commonly trips up founders who have a great tech but don't get Cisco's attention?
I think founders typically think they have product market fit when they don't. And founders think that there are times when founders can make the mistake of not understanding that your product, just because it's a great product and just because Cisco has tens of thousands of sellers, does not mean that those two automatically come together. In order for your product to be sold by sellers, you have to have enough of an incentive, because a seller has numerous different products. You have to make sure that your product is adding value, not just by itself, but is adding value to other things that are important to Cisco. And that's how you have to think about when you think about being in a large company, is what is the compounding effect that you can create of the platform? Can you contribute to the enhancement of the platform by providing your product as a feature of the platform? That's the important part. This is where most people get it wrong, is they come in, they think it's all going to be automatic. It's like, nothing's automatic. And by the way, it's not about just how good your product is. You have to build a great product, but you have to build a great product at the right time, in the right market that you can attack bit by bit, with the right team that knows how to go out and round you out as an individual founder with the right product that can be taken to market that can solve a real problem, where the brand of the company and the trust in the brand can be utilized by you. You're aligning with the value system of what that company's value system is, and also making sure that you can enhance it. And lastly, you're leveraging the distribution that the company has. Because if you don't leverage the distribution the company has, you might as well be a startup. There's no point being part of a large company. And so when founders start to think, they have to think in a way that is much more holistic than just an individual piece. It's one thing to move really fast, but it's just as important to move to go far. And the key is to move fast for sustained amounts of time so that you can cover the distance. And that requires stamina. And so I always, whenever I'm acquiring a company, I always have a meeting with them, with the founders, and I give them reasons why they should not come to Cisco. It would be a bad idea. And I tell them, listen, here's the reason why you should not join Cisco. Here's the reason why you should not sell your company. And I give them all the reasons why, just because I want to let them know that this is not just going to be easy to just go out and do. Like, this is your baby. You've built the baby. Only sell to Cisco if these conditions hold true. And this is how you are thinking about it. If you're not thinking of it that way, you will fail. And I don't want to buy you if you fail. And you don't want to sell to me if you fail, because it's not going to be a good experience. And, I've made about 21 acquisitions in my time at Cisco. 2 or 3 of them have failed. And the reason they failed is because the founders didn't understand this nuance. It wasn't because the technology wasn't there. It was because there was a fundamental cultural disconnect of what happened and how the founders were thinking about it. So I think it's very important to think that way.
And you kind of already answered this, but now that we're moving into the last part of the interview, rapid fire questions. Let's say that you have just one piece of advice for entrepreneurs. And I read your interview last year of how your early work in the service industry shaped a little bit how you are today. But if you had one piece of advice for founders, what would it be?
This is a game of stamina. It's not a game of intellect. It's a game of stamina. I think business is a stamina sport. Yes, there's skill. Yes, there's IQ. Yes, there's EQ. But man, stamina and persistence trumps everything else. And as an entrepreneur, you should not think about starting a company if you're not obsessed with the idea. And you should not think about selling the company if the mission of the company that you're selling into is something that you're not equally obsessed with, because you will find it to be enriching for you, but highly, highly unsatisfying. And so if you want to be fulfilled and satisfied, make sure that if you're selling it to a company, like when we acquire companies at Cisco, I always tell them, you sold your company over here, but I want you to now not just think about making that $100 million business. I want you to think about making Cisco $1 trillion business. And if you can do that, you will actually orient yourself in the right way. And we've got some people that, like a lot of people that are doing some very important projects for me right now, were founders that sold their company to me that are doing much, much larger things at Cisco. That actually their product that they sold to me was a very small part or non-existent at this point. But they have taken on a different kind of responsibilities. They are very fulfilled because they're actually, playing in a much larger playground. And what they do could change the course of the way that the world operates. That I think it's a very, very cool opportunity to have. But that is what I would advise the entrepreneurs, is that all happens with persistence, stamina, and patience. You cannot get frustrated 90% of the times. You have to be creating value 90% of the times. And it's okay for you to get frustrated 10% of the times. But if you keep getting frustrated 90% of the times, and that's why you're not creating value, then you're not utilizing, you don't have the right mental model. There will be things that companies do where you will be constantly frustrated. You don't want that to be the case.
All right. And aside from work, you must have some free time. So you must have something that you'd like to do outside of work. What would that be?
It's very, Alvaro, my better half gives me this feedback all the time, and I just don't have that many hobbies. I just work right now. And so I'm quite boring. Like, I have a 15-year-old daughter. I like spending time with her. I like hiking and exercising and stuff like that. But other than that, I don't have time for other hobbies. And right now I feel like the impact of what we are doing is so high that every minute that I can squeeze into that, other than my family and some very dear friends, like I tend to do it on that because like I feel like, like I don't really care to go out and go to the beach. I'd rather be building something. It's very boring. Like you should not take
Okay.
all your life tips and advice from me. It's not a good way to live sometimes. It works for me, but it doesn't work for most people.
Okay. But let's pretend that you have the time to have coffee with anyone in history, right? A historical figure. Who would it be?
Ever to have lived?
Yes.
I think Leonardo da Vinci would be pretty amazing. Just because, Leonardo da Vinci, I think Nelson Mandela, these are just like people who, Gandhi, they changed course through decades of perseverance on things that looked so impossible that, there was like, there was a small spark in them that said, I'm going to be able to do it. And I think humans are largely constrained by imagination. So I think if we can expand our imagination, the results tend to follow.
Okay. And one last question for me. You've had a great career, and now you're having, as you mentioned, a lot of time at Cisco that you must really enjoy, because if not, you would be doing other things. But let's say that you weren't.
I enjoy Cisco 90% of the times. 10% of the times I get frustrated just like everyone else. And if you don't, then you have to understand that if you don't get frustrated and everything is hunky-dory all the time, you're probably not pushing hard enough, because conflict is a necessary condition of business.
But if you could do anything else, let's say a completely different career, do you have any idea what would it be?
I'd be a designer.
Okay.
I love building beautiful things. And I always tell my designers, like, if I were not doing what I'm doing, I'd be a designer.
All right. That's a great choice. Jeetu, thank you so much. It's been great. And Yossi, back to you.
Thank you again.
I do have one last question. This is my favorite question of them all. What is your favorite movie of all time?
Shawshank Redemption.
There you go. One of the best ones. So one of my favorites as well. And I guess one of Alvo as well. So Jito, thank you so much for joining us. We know you're a very busy man. And honestly, it was a very honest conversation. So we really appreciate all of your answers. We learned a lot. So it's really been a joy for all of us. So thank you so much.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you again. And I like the format that you folks do. Like, I think the two format is good and very, very thoughtful questions. So thank you again.
And for everybody else in the audience, so stay tuned. We have other amazing episodes from the Chief Commercial Officer of AMD, CTO of Texas Instruments. So it's going to be interesting. Stay tuned.